I think by now everyone knows the answer to this question. So the slide's kind of irrelevant, but in a way, so like you can build apps. We're all about standards in the PhoneGap group. It's all about free open source software, and it's a powerful extensibility layer. And I think that's kind of a theme. It's also an amazing community. There was a lot of really incredible speakers today. Like we helped pick them, so I mean, maybe that's just why. But big round of applause for all these insane hackers. Really eccentric community too. So PhoneGap's also an ecosystem, at least from our perspective at Adobe. So there's Apache Cordova, which is exactly what PhoneGap is. PhoneGap is a distribution of Apache Cordova. Other people can create distributions, and we want to make that easier this year. And then there's PhoneGap Build, which is a cloud-based compiler. And the reason we created PhoneGap Build was because it just made life that much easier for us to build applications. And so we think it makes life easier for other people too. I'm mostly going to talk about Cordova. Cordova is an Apache project, and Apache gives you a really long URL that no one's going to be able to remember, so we registered cordova.io. Probably not supposed to do that, but if you want to find out more about the open source side of PhoneGap, that's where you can go look. So mobile operating system compatibility and extensibility layer, it's a really douchey statement. Today we support these platforms as kind of core platforms, or platforms that we maintain and that we work on all the time. And that's pretty neat. There's a lot of them. But on the horizon, we're seeing all kinds of new platforms. So by this time next year, we'll have support for all of these platforms as a core part of PhoneGap, which is crazy. That's a lot of phones. And Tizen and Firefox OS, formerly BootGecko, are also interesting because these are just web platforms. They're just essentially WebKits on top of a kernel. And we're seeing a convergence of this idea. So the web as a platform is not going away. One of the big themes for the next year is what we're calling developer ergonomics. And then someone's like, that means we're going to be the Herman Miller chair of software development or mobile development. So developer ergonomics. First thing that we wanted to add, and we got most of it in for PhoneGap 2.0, is CLI tooling. We're going to keep building on top of that. The CLI tools right now for common workflows, like debugging your project, kicking up emulators, creating projects, this is going to allow us to like hook into all the other larger tools, like things like text editors and IDEs that people are used to using. We're going to continue working on that. We have debugging with Winery, which is only getting better all the time, and we have emulation with Ripple, which is only getting better all the time too. So the idea of our plugin API is that you can extend PhoneGap into use cases that maybe we don't want to support necessarily, and now we're documenting it. And we also want the ability in the future for people to be able to compose their own versions of PhoneGap. And Gord was kind of spoiling everything for me by showing you guys what that would look like, but the idea is that you could add platforms and remove them, and then you could add APIs and remove them to those platforms. In order for us to do this, we first have to have a standard format for a plugin. If you go to our GitHub for plugins, it's kind of this wild west of mess. And we finally started to agree that we know whatever the packaging format for a plugin is, and we'll be able to do things like automated install and removal and discovery. Last year, I was talking a lot to Isaac in the Node community about how he went through the process with npm.js, because it's probably the best package manager in the industry. And he's like, it has to be only for Node. That's flipped around, and now the Node community wants to work with us, and we're probably going to be prototyping all this stuff on top of it. In fact, it's already started, and Max and I were talking about this earlier. So in the coming months, you're going to see a lot of PhoneGap plugins move into the Node npm.js registry. As a starting point, we'll probably have our own instances. npm.js registry is actually just a CouchDB, and so it allows replication. It would allow, at least conceptually, us to have many registries. So you could have private registries, you could have public ones. Your company could have its own registry, and you could have your own plugins, which would be great. Web standards are really important to the PhoneGap project in order for it to succeed in its mission to not exist. We want this to be browser-based development, and so we're involved in a whole bunch of different standards. Adobe is actually super involved in the CSS working group. We're doing all kinds of stuff around CSS, like regions and shaders, and I can't remember the rest. There's a whole bunch, which is cool. We work with the group called the DAP. The widget working group, or the widget spec, is kind of where we started to go, and that's where our config XML comes from. And then there's sysapps, which we already talked about, so I don't really need to say too much. Oh, that's weird. Why does it do that? Oh, it's because I'm not full screen, maybe? Nope. Oh well. So one thing that we do that's really different, or at least different from a lot of software projects, is what we call an agile release train. And what this means, it's basically how Chrome works and Ubuntu. We ship on a regular cadence, and so we ship a point release every month. This month we're going to be shipping 2.1. And that means that we've decoupled features from the version number, and we've decoupled marketing from everything altogether. This is a vastly superior software model. It means it's way better. I mean, when you have all these things coupled together, then you have big releases that happen once a year. When we used to ship software on a CD, it made sense, but we don't do that anymore, so it doesn't make sense. And it also gives us the ability to react. When Apple shipped iOS 5.1, I believe, they broke local storage. 2 days later, we fixed it with a point release in PhoneGap. We couldn't have done that if we were on some kind of long release cycle where we had to have features on a particular release date. And so we're going to continue to do that. So with this in mind, oh, weird. Come back to me. There it is. So this is our tentative release schedule for the coming year. December is a Unicode snowman. So this doesn't mean we're actually going to nail any particular features in these dates, but you can bet that these are the dates that we're going to, or these are the months that we're going to hit these certain release numbers, which is great. You can count on us to actually ship. This is sort of split up. Apache requires called board reports, which are really just sort of lightweight reports on what happened in the project, what's going on with contributors and committers, are we getting near graduation as to a top-level project. And it kind of goes on a quarterly basis, so I'm going to show you our kind of general idea of our roadmap based on that. So in autumn right now, we're going to be shipping 2.1 any day. We just called a vote thread yesterday or today, which means it's going to take 72 hours before everyone agrees that we're going to ship 2.1. There were some bugs in Mountain Lion, no big surprise, so we fixed those. We have a Firefox OS prototype on the way, which is great. We're bullish on that platform. We're working on enhancements to Cordova Android bridge, and Google's really doing most of this. If you're an Android geek and you want to see some sweet code, jump into the latest tagged releases of Android, and you can check out the 5 different bridge implementations that we're working on and the benchmarking that we're doing against them. It's super interesting code. We thought Ripple might be included as a sub-project, but I've heard news that they're going to go for top-level project status at Apache, which is great. They're going to be a dependency of Cordova either way. They're all the same kind of people, and we're working together with Ripple and RIM on this. We want first-class emulation. Right now, when you're building a PhoneGap-based application, if you don't have a phone or an SDK on your machine, you can't really do anything. Yet this is still web development, and so we want emulation to be like a first-run experience so that no matter what kind of machine you're on, no matter where you are, you can kick up an instance of PhoneGap and start developing right away. Ripple's a huge part of that. So this was hinted at earlier. Config XML parity is really important. How did it get different across the different platforms? I don't really know. It just did, and we're going to fix that. We've talked about this thing called child browser a lot, and it led to a lot of pedophile jokes. So we've renamed it to in-app browser. And just hit a point where we had to change that name. So it's easily the most popular plugin. Almost every application wants the ability to spawn a browser without leaving the context of the application, which is what happens in iOS. So in-app browser is going to become a first-class part of the platform. We thought it might ship in 2.1, but it's going to ship in 2.2. That'll be available on iOS, Android. BlackBerry can't do an in-app browser. iOS, Android, and Windows Phone. With both the declarative and programmatic API. This is where all that mailing list drama came from. Child browser had its own API initially that was its own thing, but that kind of kills the goal of PhoneGap being a browser-based thing. And browsers have really, browsers are good at spawning browsers. Window.open, target equals blank. And so that's how this is going to work. We've been calling it the master script. I have 10 minutes? Okay, I gotta go fast. The master script is npm install-g Cordova. At some point, you're gonna be able to do npm install-g PhoneGap, and the PhoneGap release of Cordova will include extra bits that hook into PhoneGap build. That's being prototyped. It's not ready today. Again, working with the Node community for plugin discovery, which is awesome. In the winter, we're hoping that we'll have our plugin tooling done. We're hoping that we're going to have not only the Ripple project as a part of how PhoneGap works, but we're looking at this idea of device proxying. I was talking to Gord about it last night. It's been prototyped a whole bunch of times. When you're building an application in the browser and you're pretending to be PhoneGap, you have to fake a whole bunch of events. There isn't any accelerometer APIs for my laptop. But I do have a phone, and I could navigate to a server on my phone and then send the accelerometer events from here into the browser on my computer. And so that's what we mean by a hosted RIPL with device proxy. I take a picture with my phone, it would end up in the browser, and so your development workflow would just be way, way better. I mentioned this earlier, we're gonna unfuck HTML5 audio. Thank God. And we're going through all of our core APIs, and we're trying to figure out what's gonna come in the future and how we've kind of fallen behind on the standards and what we need to change. We want Cordova to be the lightest possible distribution, and we want our developers to use tools to install only the APIs they need. If you've been doing Android development with PhoneGap, you've probably seen an app that asked for every single permission your phone could possibly use, even though you didn't use any of them, and that's just dumb. So better tooling. Our goal is to graduate to a top-level project at Apache. I think we're going to be able to do it by winter. Spring, we're going to continue to API audit. It's going to take a while. We're going to probably start working on SysApps APIs around this time. We're hoping to do a notification center plugin. We're talking to Urban Airship about working with them on having this as a possible smart default built into the system. So notifications as a part of how PhoneGap will work. Simon McDonald, one of the most prolific Android contributors, has created plugins for native contact picking and native file picking. If you're building a PhoneGap application today and you loaded all the contacts into the DOM, your phone would die. It doesn't make sense. We should have input type equals contacts. When you click it, it should invoke a native contact picker. It'd be so much nicer. So I want to thank all the contributors to PhoneGap that are here. And with that, I want to also remind you guys that there's two goals for this project. The first goal is a first-class development platform for the web, and the second goal is that we're not using PhoneGap anymore and we're back to building web apps. If you're building an application, ask yourself if you even need to use us. And if you want to help, there's lots of ways to get involved. One thing, like I said this the other day to a bank, I'm like, you guys should get involved with the PhoneGap project, and they laughed at me. They're like, well, there's no way we want to get involved with what you guys are doing. We're like, even filing a bug is actually getting involved. Building apps is really easy. We're also seeing a lot of kids start using PhoneGap, which I think is super interesting. So if you know any young person that wants to get involved in programming, PhoneGap's a cool way to do it. Check out Cordova.io if you want to learn more about contributing. And with that, I think it's time for us to drink some beer.
Hello. First of all, are there any questions for Brian about the roadmap? No. Okay, it's clearly oh, wait a minute, there's one question somewhere coming up.
Hello. I was just interested in the CLI tooling you were mentioning earlier and how that, because I work in line of business applications and we're not necessarily keen on like cloud building all of our applications. Is the CLI tooling going to help us build locally rather than with a cloud service?
Yeah, so the CLI tooling looks locally first and then falls back to the cloud. But you know, conceptually, once those hooks are in place, there's nothing stopping you from creating your own compilation service using those CLI tools, so those same CLI tools. We're hoping people will do that. The reason we're adding this stuff is we want it to be easy as possible to work with these APIs.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Cool.